particularly in relation to this new proposal on indemnity insurance for first-time buyers for their mortgages, to be able to get the deposit together, that we were back to old-fashioned politics of election stunts, that the lessons from the past haven't been learned. How do you answer that?
Well, I mean, we have to respond to the problems of today as well as hearing the lessons of the past. That's important. But it's the problems of today. And the issue that we face today is that as the economy recovers and as helpfully there's a modest rise in house prices in a lot of different parts of the country and a steeper rise in Dublin, you have particularly young people coming forward who've been maybe working for 6 to 10 years and they're now interested in buying a house. The issue, though, is supply. Supply, supply, supply.
And if you take measures to boost demand, without that supply being there, which it isn't at the moment, all you're going to do is inflate prices, surely.
And that is at the heart, Anya, of the government's construction programme, is to increase supply.
Okay. Pearse Doherty,
home ownership in Ireland is important.
No, it's not. This is like, if ever there was red flags, this is the red flags. Like the idea that the government are coming in and basically saying banks aren't lending to individuals because they feel that they can't pay back the mortgage that they're looking for. So the government are going to come in and guarantee a portion of that there, which pulls up the loan-to-value ratio. This was at the core of the banking crisis in the past. It wasn't the only issue, but it was also in relation to taxation incentives. But if you actually read the rest of the document that the government have produced, their so-called 75 points that deal with housing, a number of those points deal with taxation of the construction industry. The government are committed in next year's budget to look at actually how taxation and the construction industry interacts. We expect that will be reducing charges. They've said that they will bring in legislation to reduce development charges for construction, and they've also said that they will lower or maybe even eradicate the need for developments to actually provide social housing through the Part 5. This is a recipe that we've seen previous to 2008.
What are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to say to young people who are stuck paying very high rents and not able to afford to buy a house because they can't compete with cash buyers, particularly in a market like Dublin, are they supposed to say tough?
No, what they're supposed to do is actually deal with the core of the problem. Well, one of the big problems that we have right across the state is that we have 90,000 families that are on social housing waiting list. Those are now in rented accommodation, which are putting pressure on others that are in rental accommodation. We've seen the prices of rent right across the city and elsewhere rise dramatically.
So what do we do? Do we bring in rent caps?
Well, you should actually bring in a fair rent cap that would actually see a fair rate of return for landlords, but ensuring that people are protected. But more importantly, you have to go to the core, and that is that social housing needs to be built again. And what the government are projecting, for example, I think about a 68 million over a 2-year programme, which will build, 449 houses, isn't simply good enough. We need serious investment in social housing, and there are models that can look at not just the government, but models that we put forward in South County Dublin, which looked at independent housing trusts being able to access finance that will build those type of housing. That's what's needed.
But for all your talk on this, Minister, that you're simply not building enough affordable housing and social housing.
Sorry, after the bank collapse, housing and construction collapsed. I know as Minister for Social Protection that there are still up to 70,000 former construction workers unemployed. Slowly but surely many of them are returning to work. But what we need to do is to increase supply, if I may say to Pearse, across all the headings, including private builders, building houses for young couples who are in employment, as well as local authorities.
Which is inevitably a medium-term project. This problem is not going to get solved this year, next year, and it'll be the year after, won't it?
There are a number of things that can be done. For instance, say, take a builder in the Dublin area who could start building 50 houses, say, in instalments over a period of time. The critical issue there is finance for that builder and cash flow. Because our traditional banks are still repairing their balance sheets, the critical issue there is the Labour Party proposal, which we included in our election manifesto, to have a strategic investment fund. We will be actually
given that it's going to be a few years before these houses are built and people are able to move into them, what about a rent cap now? Because this is one of the biggest problems for an awful lot of people on lower incomes. The rents are climbing,
well,
and they can't
what I
afford
would say,
housing.
even before Iran cap on you, is supply. And there, for instance, we've local authorities.
That is a couple of years away.
Let me explain this. In my local authority and other local authorities, some of the local authorities, for instance, when they get a council house or property becoming vacant, they actually board it up for anything up to 18 months. That's wrong. Now, the Minister has given specific instructions to the local authorities.
But these are minuscule measures, Minister,
well,
compared
in the
with
Dublin
the need.
area,
Rent cap would help an awful lot of people.
Just hold on. In the Dublin area, at any one time, believe it or not, among some of the local authorities, there can be literally hundreds of houses, much to the total disappointment of the people who live beside those houses. So, you see, that will result in an extra flow of a couple of hundred houses.
I find it's bizarre that Minister Joan Burton took 3 years to figure out that it's actually a bad idea to board up council houses, and we should make some money available.
I've been on the council
Excuse me,
since
I didn't interrupt
Pearse,
you. With respect,
and I have said this all along.
I find it's bizarre that a minister sits here 3 years after being elected to office. Collectively, the cabinet decides that it's a bad idea actually boarding up these houses. We should rent them out, and we should allow the council the money to afford them to put a lick of paint on these houses. The problem is with their strategy. I agree, Joan Burton, that we need to actually increase not just social housing, which isn't in your strategy, but also private housing, because the demand is there for private housing as well. The point I've made to you, Minister, is that the idea of allowing 449 houses to be built over 2 years simply doesn't go far enough when you're dealing with the issue of 89,000 houses.
McVerry, who's saying today that the crisis in housing and homelessness is an issue that could well bring this government down.
And what I agree with what Father McVerry had to say is he said as well, we need to build more housing units. Now, this is actually a virtuous circle, because if we actually get that house building underway, which I and the Labour Party are certainly absolutely determined to do, we are now going to have our strategic investment bank, by the way, to actually fund particularly the small and medium-sized builders. These are the people critical to the recovery. But it's a virtuous circle.
Can I homeless because of lack of rent caps as well?
We're going to stop this one here because we have other guests coming to join us, and we also have more to talk. We'll be able to come back to this idea of the street. If, you know, Friday's vote is a referendum on whether the voters have forgiven and forgotten with Fianna Fáil, a referendum on government policy. It's also a referendum, particularly given that arrest in Northern Ireland in relation to the Jean McConville inquiry. It's also a referendum on Gerry Adams' leadership, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. And I think we're going to have a good election. We're here on the doorsteps. People are engaging with Sinn Féin's politics, with Sinn Féin's view and our approach to the economy. Despite what Minister Hogan would say, water charges aren't in the north, and people know if they're following what's happening in the north is that actually Sinn Féin stopped them coming in, being imposed, and people are fed up with it.
Is he an issue on the doorsteps? He's an issue in the opinion polls, it seems. He's an issue in the newspapers.
Well,
is he an issue on the doorsteps?
Are you surprised that he's an issue for independent newspapers? In fairness,
I'm asking you about whether he's an issue on the doorsteps.
No, he's not. It's very clear he's not. I was with Gerry Adams and Leon Urida in Cork, and I can tell you the area was flocked with people coming over to shake his hands and to support him in terms of what he's done with the peace process, but also in terms of leading this party. And look, the party, I think, is going to have a good election. Can you think of any other party leader, though, that would be arrested in connection and questioned in connection with a notorious murder inquiry, who could rebound in the way that he appears to be doing? You forgot to. Yeah, well, you can invite my opponents, but you forgot to say not charged as well.
Yes.
So somebody was
arrested and questioned.
But not charged as well. And the point is, with respect, the point is we're fighting an election campaign. There will be those who want to distract us from the election campaign. There are people out there who believe very clearly that this was a political stunt within the PSNI. He wasn't charged after 4 days of question. We've dealt with all of that there.
Okay.
But we're hearing, and what we're hearing,
question to you, Phil Hogan, because if, for instance, Sinn Féin,
you want to hear what the
issues are. Independents and others, we could see that category possibly being larger than Fine Gael, the largest party.
Well, I think there's a lot of people that will turn to independence. There's a lot of people who've lost faith in politics and they see independence as an easy way out.
But they feel they can trust an individual more than a party, maybe.
Yeah, well, but I think there's been a number of prominent independents who've done a lot of good work, but independents are a unique bunch of people. There's from the far right to the far left, and I think what Sinn Féin's offering people is a team Sinn Féin, whether it's at local council, whether it's in the Dáil, or whether it's in the European Parliament, and that's why people are coming to us. People are coming to us because of the leadership we've given on the ground. Joan Burton will say they're the only party that have a responsible planning. Sinn Féin were there alongside that.
Well, actually, we're going to hear from, because there are three other, some of your counterparts. There may not be a leadership issue in Sinn Féin next weekend when the votes are counted, but the big challenge, a big question about Sinn Féin's performance in this election will be whether you're able to translate what the polls appear to be suggesting about your trend into turnout on the day. And the other thing is about Sinn Féin and its capacity to pull in transfers, because you're really going to need those transfers next week, even if the trends are right and you're doing well on first preferences.
Yeah, look, the polls obviously have been favourable to Sinn Féin, but then you get one poll that says your candidate's going to get elected, and another poll the next day that says your candidate may be just scraping in, or may not get the seat.
And there does seem to be this problem with Sinn Féin in terms of translating on the day, actually getting what the polls suggest you might get to the actual ballot box.
Well, we're not sure about that there, because this is the first, the last general election, Sinn Féin secured just below 10%. The polls are showing that we're doing a lot better. I think all of our European candidates, the four across the island of Ireland, are in contention for a seat. Definitely the three in the south here are fighting for the seat, but no votes are cast, so we're not taking anything for granted. We are obviously unique. We're fighting an election north and south. There's 346 candidates across the island standing for local elections for Sinn Féin. And it's very much about the policies. There's been a lot of talk about leadership and who leads the party and all the rest. For us, it's not about personalities, it's about policies. And a lot of people, in our view, aren't concerned about who's leading Fianna Fáil or Labour or Sinn Féin. It's about the austerity that they're feeling. Water charges is just another example of that. I don't think it's the dominant issue. It's just the latest in a list of challenges that they and their family face. And that's why I think people are responding to Sinn Féin, because they know we're genuine when we're talking about anti-austerity. Okay. They know that we'll stand up and speak out when it needs to be done.
And Phil Hogan, Enda Kenny, of course, his position as leader seems to be completely secure, but the issue that's on his table after votes are counted and after we see what the outcome of these elections are going to be is the reshuffle.
How radical? Years. And I expect that the stability that we have created over the last 3 years will be rewarded on Friday when people think long and hard about these.
For many families, there is not stability.
There is. For the
tens of thousands of people
who are going to abolish water charges and property tax.
For the tens of thousands, we've made it very clear that we will abolish property tax if we get into government.
Income tax.
But let me finish in this here. For the tens of thousands of people who are in mortgage distress, and while you twiddle your thumbs, there is no stability for them. For the thousands of people who've emigrated, the mothers and fathers who've now looking at their kids through Skype, there is no stability for them. For the people who are poor as a result of Joan Burton's policies in terms of social welfare, there is no stability for them. Yes, you have saved certain people. You definitely saved the banks with one of your first decisions to come in and give 20 billion to them. You agreed on your first decision to inject 20 billion euro.
And you saved
next Friday. And you saved some of the elite in our society.
This programme to a close. So that is all from us for this week. And just to remind you, thank you, Joan, just to remind